Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining our Partner Solutions session today. We're going to be talking about chamber strategies in a post-COVID world. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a few housekeeping reminders. This is an express session, so we'll be about 20 minutes with about 5 to 10 minutes of transition time that will allow you to get to your next track of sessions, which begin at 1:30. All attendees are muted throughout this session, so please use the chat if you have any comments or questions for our speakers. We're going to use about the last 5 minutes for Q&A, and so we'll take as many questions as we have during that time. This session is being recorded and it will be available tomorrow on the event site, so please feel free to share it with your colleagues who may not have been able to attend. So now I'd like to introduce our panel. We have Tony DeLisi and Jennifer Vernon from EY's Economic Development Advisory Services, Adam Knapp from the Baton Rouge Area Chamber, and Jeff Seymour from the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Tony to get us started.
Thanks, Amy, and good afternoon, everybody, or morning for those of us in Mountain Pacific. It's wonderful to be with you. I wish we could see everybody's faces as well, but our EY economic development practice, we have been working with a number of different chambers and economic development organizations through the pandemic as they've transitioned into the pandemic projects beginning as the pandemic's happened, and now as we're beginning recovery, including the Baton Rouge Area Chamber and the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber, and we're lucky to have Jeff and Adam here with us. And we found really with the pandemic, initially, we're all very focused on responding to the immediate challenges that were presented. And increasingly, we've been thinking a lot about recovery from the pandemic. But we're also seeing now that shift as we focus more towards those chamber strategies in a post-COVID world, when we're beyond recovery and we're returning to whatever a new normal, folks hate that term, might look like. So some aspects of economic development are going to be going back to that business as usual, but some priorities have emerged during the pandemic that will be staying top of mind. And there are even newer priorities emerging as we really think about that long-term resiliency and what the next phase looks like. And each of these things is going to look very different in every community. But we've seen with many of them that includes often more of a focus on supporting our existing businesses and our smaller businesses, and really thinking about some of these bigger topics like equity and inclusion. With all of these are raising new questions and new priorities, and we really have to think about how we fit those into the operating models for chambers of commerce and for economic development groups, and how we really sustain those strategies in the long term and in a post-pandemic world. So we're really looking forward to chatting with you today and sharing some of the experiences of our partners here. And I'm going to pass it to Jennifer.
Thanks, Tony. It goes without saying, this has been a challenging time personally, professionally for our communities. But chambers, you guys and gals, you have really stepped up to meet this moment. You've been a guiding light, not only to your business communities, but your communities overall. And I can speak on behalf of our team that you've been the bright spot to many of our days as we share some of the amazing initiatives you've put together. You've been creative, adaptive, you've been resourceful. It's really, made us smile and brought that, just a little bit of cheer to, our day to day as we hear what you're doing and all the creative ways that you've been working to support your economies over the past year and a half. One of the things we heard is, of course, that you were operating at a speed that didn't typically happen, spinning things up really, really fast, plugging the holes in the dam. Adam, specifically, you mentioned, you and your very dynamic team spinning up some initiatives in 48 hours, which of course, not necessarily a recommendation long-term for employee retention, but I'm curious to know, have any of those like sprint initiatives transitioned to a longer-term focus?
Yeah, Jennifer, it's a great question, and thank y'all for having me and Brack as part of the group. We did a sprint out of recognition that one of our companies was having trouble finding talent at a point when we had 50,000 folks on unemployment insurance. And so in response to their request to us, huddled internally and about 48 hours later, stood up a piece on our recovery page, just focused on helping employers attached to talent, did a bunch of promotional activity outreach to get the word out about this resource. And then we were refreshing that list of available employers with open jobs, probably on a weekly basis early on, and then grew that portion of our site up to a place where it actually took over our recovery portal, which was our primary channel for information, to where the talent site, we called it VR Works, got more views than anything else we were doing for a long period. We still have about 160 companies now refreshing that monthly, that are still linking and listing through their open positions there. We are in the process of planning a launch of making VR Works a permanent regional jobs portal. I know a lot of our peers in the chamber world had already had one. It was one that we had not ever engaged down that path. Having not done it before, we actually are anticipating that when we build it, and it's probably the next 90 days, we expect to launch. We want to add to it an upskilling portion of our resource that is not just about the available jobs and a really intelligent jobs matching tool, but a guide to how to get an inroad into 2-year and 4-year education, that if you want to change your career path, it gives you a best match to tell you where you're likely to be able to find a job if you took 1 or 2 additional courses, and what that rate of pay could be if you upskill. So it's really cool that we could use that to transition hopefully into something that's a permanent feature of our community. And we found funders who actually are really attracted to that idea.
Yeah, I'm sure, talent was very important before the pandemic, and even more so now, for a variety of reasons. And Adam, I know your team has also put a stronger focus on existing business. And Jeff, I think your team has done so as well. Can you describe from Oklahoma City side some of the challenges and changes that you faced in the past year, and what do you see the next year holding?
Yeah, sure. And again, thank you. Like Adam said, thanks for being able to be part of this discussion. It's maybe one of the most important discussions I think we're having as an industry, and certainly seeing a lot of changes happen around us. But from a Oklahoma City Chamber perspective, we kind of operate in a couple different buckets. We have traditional chamber work and economic development work all in the same organization. And so from an economic development lens, for many, many years, we have really been strategic not to holistically engage in small business development work. We kind of said, whether it was small business work or minority business support, there's a network and a framework that exists to support those businesses. And, with COVID, that whole world changed. What happened around allocation of federal dollars and resources and local resources really pointed out this really inability of the framework to push out resources holistically into the community and be inclusive. And so we had to really take a step back and say, of the programs and policies that rolled out during COVID, which of these things do we want to keep long-term, tweak to be more sustainable, and make sure we have the resources and people to deploy into the communities to make these things work. And, that's actually a partnership we've been working on with EY. But, what we really saw is when you dug into the statistics, resources were flowing in our community to places where you'd expect them to go based on banking relationships, based on historical access. But our smallest businesses that make up the texture of Oklahoma City and our minority businesses were specifically being left behind with resources of many types. And so this became a really community-wide conversation. Give a lot of credit to our mayor who, when he was elected mayor a couple of years ago, really rolled out the mantra of one OKC and really making sure no resident got left behind. And so what we're really in the middle of now is saying, traditionally we've done all the things that you would expect from an economic development organization: recruitment, innovation, entrepreneurship support, and how do we integrate and make small business support and supporting our smallest and most fragile businesses be successful long-term as part of that overall strategy. So this is, the only other thing I'll add is, I think what we'd all say, and maybe Adam would say to this too, is the easy work's been done. Rolling out easy money has been done. Now we're moving into systemic work, and looking back, there's 100 plus to 200 years of challenges around this conversation. So we know we're just now getting into the hard work, and it's going to be a long path, and I don't want this to be the flavor of the day.
Yeah, no, that was something, of course, in our initial conversations, that not being the flavor of the day and keeping that momentum when you start having to dig deep in those issues, that's going to be very important. Adam, as Jeff mentioned, your strategy also has a D&I focus. And I know small business was, you had a similar thing going on in the Baton Rouge area. It's like there were a lot of people doing it, but, how do you tackle the certain issues related to small business? And just curious, what are your concerns about, supporting small business and keeping that D&I focus, keeping that momentum moving forward.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and for us, it was interesting that I think Baton Rouge, and probably for a lot of chambers, COVID pre-George Floyd was already a difficult set of conversations about the challenges facing businesses shutting down, reopening. Am I allowed to be open? What are the rules? How do I reopen safely? And being that resource partner to help folks through some difficult business conversations, it did soften the kind of the readiness of the community and our board and our staff for vulnerability. And I think that was a key aspect, that when George Floyd was murdered, that our community and our organization were more open to a conversation, frankly, that Jennifer, EY had already kind of started pointing us down the path that BRAC should be more of a leader on this than we have been historically. And for us to be able to be open about that, first we started with a focus on the moment we were in the pandemic. We wanted to understand how the pandemic was affecting minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses differently than it was affecting everybody else. And so we did a really quick sprint project to understand the effect of it. There was no good data on that in our metro area. That helped everybody better understand it. What we saw was a disparity resource, as Jeff was alluding to. PPP was not being applied for by smallest minority-owned businesses in Baton Rouge as it was by all businesses. And so we did a huge media push just to be an intermediary to help our bankers, who were absolutely more than willing to help, but finding access to businesses that were perhaps distrustful of government, distrustful of the process, and didn't think it was going to be anything that would ever be forgiven for them. And so we played this great role of intermediary in a short sprint to help do that. We also opened up that businesses who wanted to have internal conversations with their staff. We've got a great nonprofit in Baton Rouge called Dialogue on Race. And so we offered to pay anybody who wanted to go into dialogues for their staff or their executive team, that we would help kind of cost match their entry into a conversation that maybe they haven't had before. And things like that, I think we're beginning of a process that now is fully embraced in our new 5-year strategy that we're just launching this year, really set up that we were ready to be able to engage and lead on this work for our organization.
Well, I know we are very excited to watch both of your organizations over the next 5 years as y'all tackle these strategies. And Adam, one of the things you said that really stood out to me is like the power of information. Sometimes that data, some people need that to really, see where the gaps are. Maybe we're so used to our day-to-day that we don't realize, like, perhaps those that aren't being served the same, and having those facts that you just can't ignore, sometimes it's very powerful to get people moving in the direction they need to be. So thank you both for sharing that. I believe it's time for Q&A. We've got a few minutes left for that. Tony, what's been populating in the chat box?
Nothing yet. So if anybody's got questions, I know this is a quick run through a lot of big concepts, but I was just gonna say I really like what you said there, Jennifer, highlighting what we've heard as well about the power of information and understanding those gaps in our system. And I was thinking a moment before, listening again to Adam and Jeff and thinking about these stories, those gaps, those almost cracks in our system. This pandemic really highlighted where all of our communities are the most fragile. Whether that's for small businesses, particular vulnerable communities within every city that we live in, every region. And I was just so impressed by how places have stepped up and thought about how can we really address those needs during this pandemic, and thinking about these ways that we can keep up that support and fit that into our traditional economic development framework.
I mean, one thing I might add that complements what Adam just said is that, and what you just said, I think we also, the vulnerability and having personal vulnerability, there's a lot of organizations, and I could list off a bunch, Urban League, the Black Chamber, Hispanic Chamber, there's all these organizations that have for a long time raised these issues and said that this is important work, and probably didn't get listened to by the community as much as they should. And being vulnerable, I think we're in that place, I think, of stepping back and saying, in this work, there's some places we need to lead. There's also a lot of places we just need to be a seat at the table and let some folks who have been doing this work for a long time take a different role and listen to their voices. And so I think there's a lot of being vulnerable here that I think we're all learning about.
That's a great point. We were all very vulnerable this past year, and I think it brings communities together to have those combos. Hey, Adam, I'm getting a question from Vonnie Mickelson asks if you could elaborate a bit on some of the quick sprint projects you mentioned and whether or not those approaches are viable for future problem solving. I know we had some of that conversation about how tough those quick sprints could be.
Well, it's tough on the staff to do it, and I think we had put all our traditional work on pause, and so we had just kind of set the table for the pandemic that all of our agenda of work that we had planned for the year pre-COVID, we have put on hold. So we have a staff of about 30 folks, and we just on a weekly basis assign staff into project teams as we needed resources. That model, I think, is one that still holds true today, as we have specific things that come up that are not in your annual work plan or your quarterly work plan or even your weekly work plan that you need a team member from 2 or 3 places. Now we have a functionality to do that. Frankly, I think remote work has made that a little easier, that folks can jump in and jump out of work teams to find each other. The technical capabilities are a little easier to use. So we did that around, just 3 examples. We did it around the BR Works site that I alluded to earlier, which was about a 48-hour kind of sprint project with about 3 or 4 team members, both marketing, design, and kind of content. We did it around building a Black-owned business database, which we didn't necessarily put that externally, but we needed it to reach out to business owners to offer that we could connect them to PPP and ask them to be a referral partner network. And then we've been building upon that with different initiatives along the way that have matched that. But last year, I think those were 2. The third that I would highlight was the building of a weekly economic dashboard, which we had not built something like that before. Now it's kind of something we put out on a monthly basis. I should say it was weekly before. And the rhythm of that actually was something that we built in about a week, and now is something that we kind of continue to reproduce on a monthly basis. In fact, I just had an investor on a fundraising call this morning tell me that was the most valuable thing we did for him, was give that to him so his bankers knew what was happening in our market, and we continue to lend to his investment during the pandemic. And I hadn't heard that example before, but you never know how people are going to find what you're doing valuable in their own business. So it was interesting.
Yeah, the speed of all of those is remarkable, and knowing the types of decisions that have to be made there. I got a question that says from the BG Chamber, and it's for Adam, but I think we can bridge this bit to both of you. But specifically, did the diversity of membership in the chamber increase when you acted as the intermediary between diverse businesses and nonprofit, was asked. But I think broadly around this question, tackling some of these topics and bringing them to the table more, have you seen, in Oklahoma City or in Baton Rouge, chamber membership change at all?
I would say maybe not. I would say from a couple different angles, I would say the engagement has changed. I don't know that our membership has changed, but I think what we've seen is a lot of our corporate leaders are also trying to figure out best practices and to have them engaged in a meaningful conversation with our staff to also figure out how do they address this in their own corporations and think about long-term strategies. That has been a change. And, I also think, kind of going backwards, it really reframed our formal and informal partnerships across the community. For instance, we are now in a formal partnership with the Urban League of Oklahoma City to do some of this work, supply chain work, other things that hadn't existed. And just the overall working relationship across the community has certainly gotten better, but I don't know that it's changed our dynamic. The only other thing I'll mention maybe is that we also have seen that, we want more representation at the table for these decisions. And we know that, our leadership in the community isn't always as diverse as it needs to be. So we probably need to think long-term about mentorship and elevating a diverse population into positions of power. So I don't know what your thoughts are.
I agree 100%, Jeff. I don't know that we've seen a huge change in our membership, nor have we wanted to try to be seen as trying to capitalize on what is, a focus of our organization, because it's important to the community and the region and the economy, frankly. We do hope it will add that. We've been building a lot of folks who participate on our diversity and inclusion council for that reason, and that has led to some additional joining, but it's more out of a sense of obligation and duty that we're focused on this as part of our work.
Amy, did you have some final comments? I know I had a thought I wanted to share at the end, but I'll let you.
Yeah, Tony, I'll give you a moment to wrap us up. But before you do, I just wanted to thank all of you for sharing your time and experience with us today. I also wanted to thank the attendees for joining us. Again, this session was recorded, and so it will be available on the event site tomorrow. And I just wanted to remind all of our attendees to visit EY's virtual booth and profile page for more information. The next Partner Solutions track begins at 1:30 p.m. And with that, Tony, I'll let you give a couple of closing thoughts here.
Thanks, Amy. And yeah, please join us at that booth. I know we're going to have some EY staff there all through the week. I'll be there from 1 to 2 tomorrow and Wednesday. That's Eastern time. But and if you weren't aware, many of us, we were part of Avalanche Consulting before we joined EY about a year and a half ago. So you might be familiar with many of us and our names. But I just want to thank everybody again. This has been tremendous. There's so much that we could go into around these topics, and this is just a piece. So please engage with us, Adam, Jeff, others to continue these conversations. I just want to highlight that I love that last question got to as well, that power of partnerships here and collaboration that we really saw come out of COVID. If it didn't exist in communities before, it's such a driving factor. And I know with the memberships, we've seen in the work we've been doing that there's such a stronger engagement between chambers of commerce in the community, bringing Black chamber, Hispanic chamber, and others to the table. So not necessarily a question around membership for one chamber, but really how can we best leverage the expertise of our partners and really work together to support all businesses and all people in the communities in a really effective way. So I love this conversation. I hope we can all continue it, and thank you very much for joining us.